Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee 1 meeting, which has been convened as a hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing it either from the Council chamber here at Civic Offices, Angel Street, Bridgend, or from remote locations. Some of you may already be aware that I have a condition called adult onset epilepsy, which occasionally results in me experiencing short absences or mild seizures. On the rare occasions that this may happen in a meeting, you should not be alarmed, and should I as chair experience one of these absences or have any other technical ICT difficulties during the meeting, it has been agreed that Councillor Amanda Williams will step in temporarily as chair during the meeting. Please can everyone ensure that mobile phones are switched off or switched to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda, and I will ask the officer to present a brief summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Officers and members are reminded to refer to the page numbers contained in the public version of the agenda report pack. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their microphones on at that point. But I would ask that, with the exception of myself as chair, at all of the times you keep your microphone switched off, as this will help to minimize any background noise and interference. However, as a trial measure, I would invite members and officers to leave their cameras on for the duration of the meeting. Whether attending in the chamber or remotely, if any members and officers wish to raise a point or question, they should click the raise hand icon at the top right-hand side of the Microsoft Teams window, and I will come to you in the order I receive requests. If you are in the chamber, please switch on the microphone on your desk and speak directly into the microphone to allow those who are remote to hear you clearly. And then please lower your hand once you have finished speaking. The instant messaging chat button has been disabled for this meeting, and please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout its duration, and where necessary, we'll mute those not being used. I will ask officers to introduce themselves when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. They too should ensure microphones are switched off when not in use. I will now proceed to the agenda, and item 1, apologies for absence. I will now ask Lucy, our Scrutiny Officer, to announce the apologies for absence received. Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. So I've received apologies for absence from Group Manager Family Support Mark Lewis, Operational Manager Youth Justice Service Catherine Evans, and Registered Representative Lindsay Morris.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Are there any further apologies for absence? Okay, I now move to item 2 on the agenda then, and that's declarations of interest. If any member has an interest to declare in any matter on the agenda, please click on the raise hand icon. And we come to Councillor Martin Jones.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Can I please declare a personal interest in agenda item number 4, which is about youth justice services across the County Borough of Bridgend. I am a sitting justice at Cardiff Magistrates Court, so I obviously have a personal interest in justice matters. And can I also please give my apologies? I have a school meeting at 1:30 this afternoon as part of my councillor cum governor duties for Bettos. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Are there any further declarations of interest? Councillor Joanna Llewellyn-Hopkins, please.
I'm a member of the South Wales Crime Panel, so it's a personal interest, please.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any further declarations? Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Thanks, Chair. Not a declaration of interest. I was a little bit slow. Just apologies. I am going to have to leave about 12:30-ish, I think.
Okay, thank you. That's been recorded. Are there any other apologies for absence or declarations of interest? I can't see any further indications, so we move to item 3, and that's the approval of the minutes. Please can I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the 13th of March 2023? Councillor Amanda Williams.
I'm happy to move them.
Thank you.
I'm happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Llewellyn-Hopkins, do you have a question on the minutes, or?
No, it was just a second. Martin got there before me.
That's fine. You can third the minutes. Thank you. That's great. We now move to item 4, and that's the Youth Justice Service and Operational Plan. I now welcome all the officers to the meeting, and I believe Krista Bonham-Griffiths and Kevin Reeves are going to present the report. Krista.
Is that okay? Sorry. Morning, everybody. I'm Krista Bonham-Griffiths, and I'm the Strategic Service Manager for Bridgend Youth Justice Service. So I've completed this report, which presents an update on Youth Justice Service progression against recommendations and actions, both in a previous inspection from 2019 and then a subsequent follow-up inspection in 2022. So there were 2 inspections that were carried out on Bridgend Youth Justice Service. The first one, the first inspection was part of a wider Western Bay inspection where the Youth Justice Services were amalgamated as in 3 areas, Neath Talbot, Bridgend and Swansea. And then the second subsequent inspection was when the Youth Justice Service was disbanded and became a Bridgend standalone Youth Justice Service at that point. So initially, in the initial inspection in 2019, unfortunately, there had been an inadequate rating via that inspection. But when the inspectors returned in 2022, at that point, the inspection rated the service as requires improvement, which actually was quite a improvement journey from where the inadequate rating had been received in 2019. There were quite a large number of recommendations in the subsequent inspection in 2022. And these included a number of the following. And my report does actually go into more detail in terms of the recommendations and then our progress against those recommendations. So subsequently, we put together an action plan, which was on the back of the 2019 inspection. And that action plan carried us through into the following inspection in 2022. And we had to undergo a rather large restructure as part of this process. So the Bridgend Youth Justice Service structure changed quite dramatically. So by 2022, there was quite a large difference to the makeup of the service. So in terms of the recommendations from the final inspection 2022, we were required to improve our mental health provision, and that included our community and adolescent mental health service response to children within our service. We needed to improve our management board membership, to develop the Youth Bureau, which is for children who come into the police station and have to undergo an out-of-court disposal bureau as an outcome for the offence they've committed. We also needed to ensure that our child exploitation framework was fit for purpose and that our assessment and planning ensured the safety of the child. So as part of that, we've developed a very robust quality assurance system that sits to ensure all of the auditing of assessment and planning is firmly in place. And there was also a requirement to improve our trauma-informed support to children who are experiencing complex trauma, because as you probably well understand from the report, a number of the children coming through our service in youth justice have got extensive trauma in their backgrounds. and also our multi-agency collaboration with a number of services, but including children's social care, youth support services, the police, CAMS, and our fax forensic service was vital to ensure that there was a holistic plan in place to meet the needs of individual needs of children coming through our doors. We also have a responsibility to be compliant under Youth Justice Board for a set of standards. So those standards are called the National Standards for Youth Justice, and they've been revised in 2019. So we needed to ensure that we were completely compliant with those 6 sets of standards. And so further reorganisation and structure has happened, which has enabled us to improve both managerial oversight and operational provision. We, as a result of doing quite a lot of work and having a very robust action plan in place, we have been just earlier on this year removed from all monitoring from the Youth Justice Board. So that was quite a big move in terms of progression for us, that the Youth Justice Service has actually acknowledged that we have really made some headway even since the inspection in 2022 and are no longer in requiring that additional monitoring from the board. So that's really, really positive. We still have a number of priorities which I've outlined in the report, and obviously that is to continue to improve safety planning and assessment and planning of children, to ensure that we continue on this collaborative journey with other services, particularly in respect of children who are being exploited in the community. And we are still doing quite a lot of work with our CAM service to try and ensure that we have all the services fit for purpose on the ground to respond very quickly to children's mental health needs. We've extended our speech and language provision, which has allowed us to provide robust assessments to children with additional learning needs, and we have now a part-time speech and language provision and worker attached to the service. And we've done some really extensive work with our Youth Bureau and also introduced a prevention panel, which is a multi-agency prevention panel, which allows us to decide on cases coming into the service, those children who need preventative services, but it's in partnership with schools, with community safety, with youth support services and with the early help hubs, and with police, to ensure that we're making the right decisions at the right time. And actually that's allowed us to increase our preventative service work. It's doubled really the work that's coming in through the service doors, and it's allowed a defensible decision making for whether our service is fit for purpose for that child at that time, and if not, what is the exit strategy and what other services are deemed more suitable. We're in the process of developing a trauma enhanced project, which we've been very lucky to secure quite a significant amount of money. And that trauma project, which is youth endowment funded, will actually be across departments. So it'll be not just youth justice services, it'll be identifying children with trauma across youth support services, our own service, early help hubs and the edge of care services in partnership with the forensic mental health team, to ensure that we respond in a very detailed and holistic way to children with complex trauma needs. So that's a huge move on for us as wider departments, not just youth justice, but what it allows us to do is cement some of that work that's already began. So we will have Kent University that will evaluate that project as part of that new work, which will commence in October 2023. You know, from a managerial perspective, I think our board currently is operating for, you know, it's operating from a much better place than what it was previously. We have much improved partnership involvement, and that involvement is wider and more extensive. And also the board is now starting to really assist the operational work. So where we need to problem solve with board members, we're able to do that effectively on a bi-monthly basis and take complex related cases or problems to the board to ask for assistance from our wider partners. As a service manager, I have become involved in a number of safeguarding operational groups, and that includes our corporate parenting strategy. And we now have an additional post in Park Prison, where we are ensuring that resettlement and transitions processes for children are far more robust, and actually the care planning takes place with the prison and both ourselves and children's social care to ensure that that plan equates to effective management and planning in the community from custody. So, and one of the biggest pieces of work that we've undertaken is that we've developed a child's voice planning system, which allows us to really listen and glean the views of children on an ongoing basis, from assessment right through to the end of their intervention, and capture their views, which is then included in their both youth justice plan and their wider plan with other partners. And we collate that information, which enables us then to really have a solid viewpoint of our children coming through the service in a collated way. I think it's fair to say that the Youth Justice Service now is fully staffed. So for the first time in quite some time, isn't it, Kevin? And we have a far more robust management system. So we now have 2 operational managers that sit underneath that manage two teams, and the multi-agency staffing underneath are managed by the 2 operational managers. And actually, for the first time in a number of years, we've got a fully operational multi-agency service. So that's really productive for us, because it allows us to really have a more immediate response to children coming through youth justice doors. And I think that ends my summary in a nutshell.
Don't mind turning your microphone. Thank you very much, Krista, for that comprehensive introduction to today's report on the Youth Justice Service. Just want to congratulate the service really on the improvements and the direction of travel since 2019, when we became a standalone service, and some of the structural changes which you've outlined in the service to date. I know Councillor Melanie Evans had a number of questions on the direction of travel since the last report in February 2022. So perhaps I can bring in Councillor Evans now.
Hi, sorry, Alex, for that. Some of my questions on page 24, obviously the direction of travel, have actually been answered. So thank you very much for that presentation. I don't know whether it's relative to bring in my question on page 32 at this moment in time.
Let me just check for you. 32 was mental health links, wasn't it, Melanie?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, please do ask the question.
Okay, yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chair. The report mentions mental health links have improved significantly. I wonder if you can explain how significant is the improvement and what data has been assessed to understand how these links are working both effectively and efficiently, please.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Essentially, it's assessing whether the links have improved mental health outcomes. So, Krista?
I would say the links with the child and adolescent mental health service have improved significantly in terms of we now have a regular representation of child and adolescent mental health services on our management board, and she's a regular attendee. She's also helped us really problem solve some of those more difficult cases where there's been blockage or where there's been issues with the referral going in and then closure of some of those cases. We also have an operational problem solving manager that assists us on the ground. So every time we have an issue with a child with mental health problems, then we're able to access that operational manager to assist us with the process, really, and to ensure that there is some sort of response from CAMHS at the point that we need it. We now have a single point of entry access provision that is more easily accessible to us. So we've now got access to a professionals line where we can have discussions around any case that we would like to with on the ground practitioners who are working with children with complex mental health needs. And very, very shortly, we're about to get an operational CAMHS consultant that will be employed to work directly within the Youth Justice Service across Cwm Taf Morgannwg. So we will share a provision of a worker that will work comprehensively with our health worker in the Youth Justice Service to do that hand-in-hand health assessment and mental health assessment work. So that will, I think, further on develop the service from where we've already grown. In terms of data, CAMHS actually complete data requirements for any children coming through their service with mental health and coming through Bridgend Youth Justice Service with mental health issues. And they are able to unpick that for us at any point. But it's fair to say that I think when we get the new worker into post in the Youth Justice Service, that data sharing will improve, I think, much more significantly then, because it'll be children who are actually working with that consultant. So there is a little bit of way to go there. However, I think we have really travelled quite some distance from where we were and probably mostly absent of services within, it's fair to say, within Bridgend Youth Justice Service. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that response. I guess I've just got a supplementary, if you wouldn't mind, please, Chair. With regards to, you mentioned the Youth Justice Service is fully staffed earlier. However, we're still waiting for another person from CAMHS, I believe, that you've just mentioned, to come into post. So how are we fully staffed if we're still waiting to put someone into post?
So we're fully staffed in terms of what we require for core membership in terms of our Youth Justice Service. This person will be an addition in terms of what we've got from our CAMHS provision already. And it's fair to say that large numbers of Youth Justice Services do not have a CAMHS role within their service as a matter of course. It's an addition because there is a recognition in this area that there's a need. So whilst we are fully staffed in terms of the posts under Youth Justice, this post will be managed under CAMS, not ourselves, and will be a consultancy type role.
That's lovely, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Evans. Thank you very much,
Sorry.
Christopher. That. Sorry, who's coming in now?
Sorry, it was me again. Sorry, Chair. I don't know whether, because I've realised I've jumped ahead of myself, and obviously I've got quite a lot of questions to ask, because I do have some questions reference the voice of the child, but obviously I'll let you call me in when that's applicable, if that's okay. Thank you very much indeed.
We'll come back to you. I do want to go back to the very beginning of the cover report eventually, because obviously I want to take members back to the 2022 report. But given the fact that we are discussing staff, let's cover that one off now, and then we'll go back to the beginning of the report to take into account some of the other issues. So I know the Deputy Leader, Councillor Jane Gebby, would like to come in, and then I'll bring in Councillor Joanna Llewellyn-Hopkins. Councillor Gebby.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate I'm not an invitee to this meeting, but I think it would give some context in so much as I think we've missed part of the mental health strategy for children. As part of the Regional Partnership Board, one of the work streams that we have is the Integrated Children's Group, and part of that is looking around at the mental health of our young people across the Cwmtaf region. So it's a wider perspective. When staff here talk about our youth justice provision, they are only talking about our staff here in Bridgend County Borough Council. I think what I would say that all the partner agencies have to have some influence, engagement, and they have to sort out their own provision. So they are responsible for providing that provision. So legally, under health board conditions, they have to provide mental health provision for our young people, but they are still paid by the health board. What's interesting to note is we are co-producing more posts now. We're aware that we need more of these specialist people that can do some interventions with these young people, but we don't have the capacity across the region. So the more that we can co-produce these things and the more that we can have a shared resource across the region, the better outcomes we're going to have for our young people. And I just thought it would be worthwhile giving some context to that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. That's useful context. Thank you, Councillor Gebby. Councillor Joanna Llewellyn-Hopkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just interested to find out by what benchmark we are judging the intervention by CAMS, please. What benchmark are we using?
Thank you very much. Krista?
So we use an Asset Plus assessment toolkit, and then that identifies any mental health concerns that a child may have. And then from that, if there are concerns raised as part of that assessment process, then we would refer that child into mental health services to have further assessment. So we're able as Youth Justice to measure the children who have mental health concerns as part of that Asset Plus framework. And then the further mental health assessment is completed by CAMS, and then they would have benchmarks of measurement from there. We also have a performance measure now, which is in place for how many children get assessed within 5 working days of referral from our assessment process into a further more specialist assessment for mental health services. So we measure through that performance measure framework also.
Thank you for that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just while we're on staffing and other connected matters, it's logical to take the questions now that Councillor Evans has raised it. I think Councillor Evans raised a good point insofar as why has it taken the best part of, I don't know, 15, 16 months to appoint a link worker for CAMS across the Cwmtaf Morgannwg Justice Service and the Forensic Assertive Community Treatment Service to recruit psychologists, clinical psychologists and a youth youth justice trauma specialist lead, and also just building upon some of the improvement recommendations which were included in the 2022 report. I believe they recommended the posts of a service manager, lead practitioners, and a specialist risk strategic manager. I think from what I can gather from your opening remarks, they've all been filled now. They have, so that's great news. But with regards to the CAMS appointee and the other positions which I mentioned, following on from Councillor Evans's remarks, why has it taken so long for that to occur?
I think it's fair to say that there are issues in terms of recruitment across the country, and in terms of psychologists, you're actually recruiting from a very small pool of professionals. So that causes time delays and difficulties in terms of recruitment. And I think CAMS have been in the same position, but also in terms of specialist mental health officers with experience of children with complex needs. That's also a very small pool. But also, I think there has been some belief initially that we could use the single point of entry access provision, and that would help us alleviate some of the issues we were experiencing with receiving those children into service. But actually, in reviewing that and looking at that more closely, I think both the managers have felt that more specialist provision in-house to Bridgend Youth Justice Service would be a better way to go. So I think it's been a journey really in terms of considering what the options are given the recruitment issues, and then what we do as a response to that and the thereafter. So that would describe why we've had a 16-month time delay there.
Great, thank you, Chris. That was a really helpful explanation. Councillor Evans, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank the Deputy Leader for actually adding a bit more context around sort of like the resources as well. I have got another question regarding to dedicated professionals. You mentioned in the report having a team of dedicated professionals, i.e. nurses, part-time probation officer, therapist, police officer, etc. What I would be interested to understand is what happens when these dedicated professionals are on days off, annual leave, etc. Who picks up their casework, please?
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Krista?
So we have the dedicated officers on board and in-house to ensure that we have that swift response to children in terms of assessment and planning. However, that's not to say that we can't use the wider service for when those staff are on leave, and that's what we do on a regular basis. So where, you know, we've sometimes got police issues or where we've got mental health issues, we would contact the wider department, and we have link managers to enable us to do that, so that that case is picked up in the absence of the worker. So, you know, whilst we've got swift access in-house, we quite often use the wider service in terms of our referral mechanism and ongoing communication. And we meet regularly as a wider partnership to ensure that those systems are quite firm and in place for children.
Thank you very much. Are you content, Councillor Evans?
Yes, I am. So just for clarification, for my understanding, there will be someone that picks up the baton and the casework will be followed through. Hence, there will be no sort of like delays in that casework going forward.
So, you know, there will sometimes be slight delays when you have to refer into the wider service, but you know, because you haven't got that person in-house straight to refer to immediately. However, if you were in an emergency situation with any child, an emergency situation would be picked up as an emergency, so on that day, and we would cover that. You know, we have a pool of professionals that would come together and meet if there was an emergency situation for that child. So that provision is always on offer for children in emergency or crisis situations from wider departments, not just individual staff.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Evans. Thank you very much, Krista. Just returning then to the very start of the report and just the context in which we're discussing this Youth Justice Service today. The February 22 report, of course, mentioned that the service still requires improvement in spite of the fact that, as you mentioned, it's taken, it's gone forward leaps and bounds since the service was a standalone service. A number of different improvements were noted which were required. So perhaps we'll explore this in more detail during the meeting, but they highlighted that the planning and delivery of service relating to child safety and well-being, the multi-agency approach, court disposals, governance and leadership, partnership services. My colleagues will discuss the voice of the child shortly. But they did mention one item, and that was emotional mental health well-being provision for care experienced children is poor. It doesn't identify and understand the specific health needs, and there's a 2-year waiting list for neurodevelopment services. They also highlighted that there wasn't any multi-agency framework for dealing with child exploitation. So can we have some assurances that since that February 22 report, that we've made significant efforts to improve the position on that particular, in those particular areas?
Yes, so in terms of children who have complex needs and are looked after and with mental health problems, we have a trauma recovery model. That model of practice allows us to consult with both our FACS partners, any health partners and any other relevant personnel involved with the child to map out trauma from mum's pregnancy right the way to present time in a multi-agency forum called a formulation, and then provide a response to where that child is currently at in terms of their cognitive, social and emotional abilities compared to their chronological age. And actually that allows us to respond to the trauma needs of that child immediately with a planned sort of route through in terms of what those current needs of that child are, rather than just sort of be shooting in the dark really in respect of their trauma, which a number of children who are going through neurodevelopment departments will have issues around trauma, and some of the rationale for referral there is because of the extensive trauma, complex trauma that they've experienced in the background. So we've got an in-house model of practice that we are about to develop even further across departments to respond to the individual needs of children, and also where those needs are extremely complex, we would include our FACS partners in that. Who would be wide-ranging in terms of their consultation and advice. And we've got clinical psychologists that sit then as part of formulation and provide us with an advice and reports. In respect of children who are being exploited within our community, we have a really good relationship with Children's Social Care. So Children's Social Care have appointed exploitation senior practitioner, 2 senior practitioners, one who's sitting as part of the multi-agency safeguarding hub and one in the initial assessment team. And they sit as part of our team meetings on a regular basis. In fact, they come in and sit with our department on a regular basis to discuss individual children. We also sit as part of the new exploitation panel in Bridgend, which allows us to discuss on a multi-agency basis and plan for children with exploitation needs, and to try and disrupt some of that exploitation behaviour in the community that's happening to them by adults. So there's a policing exploitation team that sit as part of that. And that's really productive in terms of not just piecing together intelligence amongst children who may associate with each other, but also piecing together that intelligence of who may be perpetrating that exploitation toward children in the community. And also, I sit as part of both the exploitation task and finish group and also the exploitation strategy across Cwmtaf Morgannwg, which enables us to really have a firm response to exploitation and the development of the strategies across that region.
Great. Thank you, Krista, for those reassurances. It's really a positive step in the right direction there. Did Councillor Gebby want to contribute? I know she was eagerly going to press her button then.
I was going to, but Krista's answered most of it. I think the thing that I would advise all members is that you will be aware that we had a joint inspection. Part of that joint inspection is look at all partners and their improvements that they need to make. I would suggest, because I'm quite encouraged by the initial feedback that I've had, that our members look at that joint inspection response, and then I think you'll have some reassurance.
Thanks, that's really useful. We'll make a note of that and we'll ensure that that's the case. Thank you, Deputy Leader. Can I just, a housekeeping issue that the scrutiny team have mentioned to me, with the exception of those in the chamber, can I ask that, as I said in my opening remarks, that members who are remote, that we keep our cameras on, and this is the reason for this. If you can, and if you're dressed decently, we're trying to trial this measure in smaller committee meetings to see if the system can deal with it, as we're looking to introduce it for full council potentially. So we need to trial it at these meetings to see how the system responds to it and if we can accommodate it. So thank you to those members who have already put their cameras on. If others can do so, please do. We're now going to move to a question on the financial implications. Even though financial implications are not mentioned in association with this report, I know that Councillor Martin Jones would like to explore this issue in more detail.
Thank you, Chair. And can I say it's good to see so many faces on the screen in front of me. So hello, colleagues. Can I first of all thank officers for this report. It's good to see this progress is being made in relation to the two previous inspections. And of course, I think what particularly reinforces the challenging and complex nature of this support is the examples that you've provided in the report. So can I thank you for that. When I looked at the report on page 18 of the covering report and under paragraph 8, and it talks about financial implications, and it said at the bottom of the line there that there are no financial implications for Bridgend County Borough Council, I thought to myself, wow, are we involved in criminal justice support across the county borough and there's no financial implications? However, if you look at page 33 of the report, and there is a Bridgend Youth Justice Service budget breakdown. And when we look at that, we can see that Bridgend County Borough Council, of course, contributes to the service and meets the lion's share, I would add, of providing this service. And I'm sure if the public were to read this and look at this, they would be curious to see that probation service don't provide any financial support. And we've talked about mental health previously. The health service are also noted in the graph that not to provide any financial support. So is there any particular reason for that? And perhaps is there a funding formula in place to ensure that all relevant partners who have a statutory responsibility to deliver the plan have to meet their financial obligations?
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Krista?
So in terms of the officers that you've described, I think it may have been wise to break down the in-kind staffing that we get from services. So it may not be a monetary amount, but actually that those staff are involved and part of the service. So it's a staff in kind from multi-agency partners that we receive. So that would include police, probation services, health provision, and then CAMS provision that we receive as well. But those costs would go through their budgets, not ours. In terms of the youth justice budget, yes, it's right that there is a large proportion of funding that comes through core Bridgend funding in terms of our social workers and intervention coordinators. And youth justice service funding is highly complex in nature in that we get a large range of grants from various different places. So we get Welsh Government money, we get Youth Justice Grant money. We've just recently received funding from Turnaround, which is a Ministry of Justice funding to work more extensively with prevention. And then we get money from the Police and Crime Commissioner, a small amount from the Police and Crime Commissioner to enable us to carry out the duties. So perhaps in hindsight, perhaps that could be more explicit, perhaps in the next report that we provide to yourselves.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think that would be helpful. Councillor Jones, would you like to come back on that?
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm going to pose the question on behalf of the public. Does the probation service and the health service have a statutory responsibility to financially support the provision of youth services in the county borough? That's my first point, and perhaps there's a yes or no answer to that. But secondly, what is coming across here is the fragmented approach of funding, which would, it's difficult for you as strategic leaders to effectively plan ahead if you're getting bite-sized chunks capital as opposed to revenue. And is that a problem for you when you talk about financial management, especially with partner agencies?
There is a legal requirement for a youth justice service to have a minimum of police, education, probation, health and children's social care representation as part of that makeup of the Youth Justice Service. So there is a legal, under the Crime and Disorder Act 1998, there's a legal obligation for those services to be in place. There are formulas around numbers coming into service in terms of probation, as to then what type of provision you get. So we get a part-time officer based on the amount of children we've got coming through our service doors. It's fair to say that it can be difficult in terms of lots of different pots of money. However, I think we've had a long period of time where we've had particular grants for the long term. So whilst some of those grants are shorter term and then we can only recruit to short-term posts, actually in terms of our core membership of youth justice, that funding has always been there because it's a requirement under the Crime and Disorder Act. So, I wouldn't want to see youth justice services stripped back because having a more holistic planning service that can plan effectively enables us to deliver better outcomes for children who are on the brink or are offending. But it's fair to say that those pots of money from a core perspective are there and have been there from the Crime and Disorder Act and the introduction of yachts in 2000.
Thank you very much, Krista. Councillor Jones?
Yeah, finally from me, Chair, and thank you very much for that response. I mean, what we've actually teased out now is, we are supporting a number of children here in Bridgend, and the graph on page 54 will outline the demand on the service. Yet what we've been able to tease out this morning is probation services support for us is one part-time member of staff. And perhaps it's something for us as a committee to consider, perhaps writing to the probation service to highlight this issue, because I certainly feel that Bridgend justice services, support services, need greater support from probation rather than the current support that is in place at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I think we'll incorporate that in our conclusions and recommendations. I'm conscious of the fact that the Deputy Leader would like to contribute as well.
Thank you very much, Chair, and sorry for butting in, but just to reassure Councillor Jones somewhat, as Chair of the RPB, one of the things that I am aware of is that we now have a Director of Integrated Social Services and Health that has just been appointed. And part of the reason for that is the fragmentation that Councillor Jones has referred to. This is, of course, across adults and children's, but they will be taking on a greater responsibility for ensuring that that integration is there. Integration is always difficult. We're aware of the problems with terms and conditions from different partner agencies. It's not something that I'll rehearse again. But we do realise that we need that better engagement and communication between all partner agencies in order that we deliver more effectively for our residents here.
Thank you, Councillor Gebbie. I couldn't agree more with you. Krista, would you like to intervene as well, or you're happy? Okay. Councillor Amanda Williams then. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. One of the questions I had was linked to the question by Councillor Jones. Just for the purpose of this, because this is a test with our video screens, when he was speaking, it did break up 3 times for me. I don't know if it was just me or everyone else online. I live in an old house with thick walls, but I'm just letting you know that I did miss a few of his words. Yeah, on page 31, the second paragraph, let me just call it up, it says there are currently 33 children on the unit. Of these, 25 are from England, with just 8 from South Wales. 20 of the children are currently open to their respective home local authorities, 10 of whom are currently care experienced, with a further 5 as care open as care leavers and 3 open under care and support regulations. I wondered what that meant, specifically the term open. And when we talk about funding, does that mean if they're open with their own local authority that there is support provided by their local authorities as well, or is it all through us? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Krista?
So that refers to the children who are currently on the child person's wing in Park Prison. They would be open to their own local authority and receiving care and support planning through their own authority. But because they are placed within Park Prison, we have a senior practitioner in place to ensure that care planning is carried out effectively, and to liaise with those home authorities to ensure that they are getting the best provision in terms of resettlement and transition. And that is the purpose of that senior practitioner role, is to ensure that children who are there as part of the child wing in Park have the planning and resettlement options available to them that meet their needs.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams, you content with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to move to discussing the voice of the child. And I know Councillor Elaine Winstanley and Councillor Evans have questions on this. So Councillor Winstanley first.
Thank you. I'm just going to get my screen up to look at the question. I was very interested in to see that with the My Voice questionnaires that we had some really good feedback, and I noted that 64% did not enjoy school and 48% only sometimes got on with their family. Having these questions or video recordings was really useful for us to get to grips with where the children are coming from. Are we planning on repeating this in the future so that we can see what improvements have been made? And are we going to give specific examples of how we're working with the young people to improve their enjoyment of school or how they get on with their families? Because obviously I'm conscious that if children are not getting positive experiences either in school or with their family, it's no wonder that they're returning to a life of crime. And if we can nip that in the bud sooner rather than later, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Winstanley. Krista?
The purpose of introducing my voice was to get some additional questions answered from our self-assessment process, but it isn't the only way in which we glean the child's voice. We complete a self-assessment with a child at the start of their assessment process and then at the end and at review stages. So when I talk about review stages, that's 3 monthly reviews with children, and we focus in on what their viewpoint is and then how we are adapting our planning to respond to that child's views and needs. And then as part of that end process, we very much look at what the child's views are as part of an end process, and then would provide an exit strategy based on what their outstanding needs still continue to be. So it's an ongoing process, and I think when you look at some of our audits of the self-assessment processes, what you can see is a snapshot in time, but that is continually measured, and then the plan for the child is changed in respect of that. So any outstanding needs would be considered at 3 month points. In terms of what we do when working with children in respect of them not liking school, we have a specific intervention coordinator who works with children to try and build engagement. And she's done some really innovative work to try and improve levels of engagement of children with complex needs. And that's just things like keying into what their interests are, doing one-to-one specific intense work, and really, I think, honing into what are the strengths of the child that will help them to move forward. And we're seeing some really productive results in respect of having that direct work on the ground with children. And quite often that worker will go into schools, go into colleges, and go into alternative education places to ensure that we have a supported response to those children and that they feel that their needs are being met. But that's not to say that we've not got a really strong education department who are also really part of that planning process with those children. So we have a senior education and safeguarding team that do some sterling work to assist with the engagement of children and to support their needs. And also our relationship with schools, colleges and alternative provisions is really strong and improving all the time, I think, just by having direct workers within those environments to build those relationships. And that obviously then assists to, ensure that the needs of the children are being met. We also have a building skills project for our post-16 children. And that really does assist with children moving on in terms of practical skills around building lots of lovely castles and climbing frames. And if you look around the schools, you'll probably see some of these huge these huge buildings, really, wooden buildings that the children themselves help build with the assistance of the building skills team. And that really does, I think, assist children, and it's not suitable for all, but it assists some of our children. If you think that 80% of our children, if not more, are male, it assists some of those children just in gaining those practical skills to enable engagement for the future in terms of moving on to college or an alternative provision. Yeah, so I don't know whether that answers your question in full or just in part. I think I've forgotten the end part of the question. Sorry, Councillor.
No,
Would
that's
you like to come back?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive answer, Krista. And I think Councillor Melanie Evans would like to come in now with a supplementary.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine, as I said, comes question with regards to the voice of the child, but if I can direct you to page 29 of the public pack, it mentions 60% of young people in the justice setting have speech, language and communication needs. Every child under the age of 13 years receives a SALT assessment. The mean age of children assessed from the quarterly outcome document in Jan to March 23 is 14 years of age. Now, I understand the SALT capacity has increased from 1 day to 2.5 days a week, as previously it was recognised it did not meet the needs of the children. Firstly, can I ask, is the increase of 1.5 days sufficient enough now to meet the needs of the children? And secondly, why do we not consider every child for a SALT assessment? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Who would like to take this? Kevin?
Yeah, I can take that one. So the rationale for it being children 13 and under for a compulsory SALT assessment, that's part of a wider project across the whole of South Wales. I believe it's part of a Welsh Government project that's ongoing. Consideration is given for every child coming through the service for a SALT assessment. And if we believe that a SALT assessment is needed by a child, they will be referred for that service.
Thank you very much. Councillor Evans, would you like to come back?
Okay, that's lovely, yeah. Can I just ask again though, so do you believe that basically the increase of 1.5 days is sufficient enough now to meet the needs of the children?
Thanks.
Yes, I believe it is at present. We're able to meet those referrals pretty quickly. So from the point of referral to a point of assessment, I think it's no more than 2 weeks, which is a pretty quick turnaround.
Thank you very much. You content, Councillor Evans?
Yes, that's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams, please.
Thanks very much. Mine was on similar area as well, page 26, and the statistics there about attendance at school, did not enjoy school. 55% attend school. Of those 25, 64% did not enjoy school. And I've coupled my question in with page 47, where it looks at the adverse childhood experiences as well. And I wondered if this played a part on it, and also behaviour. As a governor in 2 schools, I know since COVID, behaviour has been a big issue for schools, and as has attendance, and it's certainly declined since COVID, behaviour and attendance. And I wondered if some of the reasons, it would have been nice to have heard from a school's perspective with regards to what they're doing to support these individuals, because I know a lot of schools have had to bring in behavioural policies that are quite rigid and are quite strict to combat the issues that they're dealing with, and the number of safeguarding referrals they're having to put through. So I wondered how schools are dealing with these individuals, because I fear that sometimes when you've been in trouble before, particularly with the law, your card might already be numbered. So how are schools combating that and ensuring that whilst they're adhering to behavioural policies and ensuring that the classroom isn't disrupted for all children, that they're providing enough support for these individuals to make sure that they're not simply not attending school because they're being expelled, or they're being sent out of the classroom because of behavioural issues, and that they are getting the support to keep them in a school environment for as much as possible. Thanks.
And thank you, Councillor Williams. And just as a rider to that with regards to adverse childhood experiences, you mentioned, I think on page 47, a breakdown of what kind of adverse childhood experiences are experienced by children. Do you assess whether there are multiple adverse child experiences of the children as well, and how is that documented?
Yes, so we carry out a trauma screening on children coming through our service, and that looks at all of the trauma events that child has experienced from mum's pregnancy right to date. And it comes up with not just a figure of the amount of episodes, but also the details surrounding that. So when we then provide trauma formulation, we're able to pre-populate those trauma events. And the reasoning for, the reason for us really wanting to have the engagement of other services as part of that trauma recovery model and that formulation is because quite often partners, especially education, can provide snippets of information and pieces of the jigsaw that will really help with that understanding of what that child has been through. And we're starting to get some really good buy-in from education and from schools in formulation, which really helps us all as a collective to really have a better understanding of the child's cognitive, social and emotional needs, as you know, compared to where they're at in terms of their chronological age. So for me, it's vital, it's really important that all services that have knowledge of that child are on board as part of that formulation, so that we can understand the child's needs far better, but also that we're able to respond as a collective. So it's not just a youth justice formulation, it's a multi-agency partnership formulation. That report then will really help, I think, professionals' understanding of the ground as to what advice and support that and what provisions that child requires to help them to move on more effectively.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Williams, did that answer all of your questions, or would you like to ask a supplementary?
Yeah, if I can ask a supplementary, I have got another question then as well. But yeah, like I said, it would have been nice to have been able to speak to some school staff to see how they deal with children in this situation. It said that 55% attend school. Are the 45% not attending through choice, or have any of them been excluded from school, either temporarily or permanently? I'd like a little bit more information on that. And then what you're doing with regards to the 68% who said they don't like school, so 64% who don't like school, to improve that, because obviously they're still children, and that's what's going to set them up for the rest of their life, is their schooling and their education. And if they're not happy at the start, then it's not going to improve at all. So that's my supplementary. Then I have another question after that. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Krista?
So I think we're really trying to do a lot of work with schools. I've met with assistant heads and heads to ensure that they understand the prevention service that's on offer from Bridgend Youth Justice Service, as well as ongoing individualised work that I've described earlier, really, in terms of having those specialist workers who carry out individual support work with those children. And also we're doing a lot of work in response to the Additional Learning Needs Code and legislation. So to, one, understand the additional learning needs of that child, and then two, how we plan as a collective in terms of individual planning and our evidence. And actually now, since April of this year, there is an additional performance measure for youth justice that includes children with additional learning needs, and how we are managing that planning as a wider education authority, but also internally as the Youth Justice Service. So we will have an ongoing requirement. I mean, we're only just at the start of that new performance measure framework, but we will be reporting from October of this year on any child with additional learning needs coming through our service and what our response is to those children.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, okay. It didn't pick up though about the attendance and if it's because they're simply choosing not to attend school. So I'd like to, maybe we could put that in our recommendations to get some more information on that if it's not available now. But my next question is again on page 31, Bridgend Youth Justice Service has also continued to, Bridgend Youth Justice Service and Police Partnership have developed its work within schools. As a governor again, I know that this has been quite sparse, the school liaison officers going into schools, either because there's been sickness or there've been a lot of new appointments. And so it's different levels of support in different schools in the borough. So I wondered what's being done to improve this, because it says you're looking at working with children to prevent crime. But if the police are not going into schools, then how are we going to improve this and increase their work with schools? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Krista?
So there is a slight difference between the school's liaison officers and the youth justice police officer. So the youth justice police officer sits as part of the youth justice service and is offering and providing support in respect of antisocial behaviour incidents, and we plan in the forthcoming year to do an extensive programme on weapons awareness with schools through the police officer and a particular volunteer that we've got that has been commended for work in Neath Talbot. So, our first step as Bridgend Youth Justice Service has been to have those discussions with the schools as a collective to provide that offer, and also to explain the offer of preventative services that Bridgend Youth Justice Service can offer on an ongoing basis, really. But the children have to meet the criteria in terms of youth justice, in terms of there needs to be a risk of offending related behaviour or risk of offending related behaviour, and then of potential harm related behaviour. So that would be our referral mechanism into our service. The Youth Justice Police Officer does liaise with a number of the liaison officers, but as you touched on, Councillor, I think there has been quite a lot of change within those posts. So that work is going to be ongoing, it's fair to say.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Williams, you content with that?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Spiller?
Thank you very much, Chair. Really just picking up on Councillor Williams' point that obviously preventative measures are very, very welcome, and often, the things that are missed out in this type of rationale. It would be very useful from my point of view to really understand what the uptaking is on that and look at a bit of the detail in behind it. Because a very small paragraph in a rather large document doesn't really do it justice.
Thank you, Councillor Spiller. Krista?
Just to say, Councillor, and perhaps explain it a little wider for you, we introduced a prevention panel in January of this year, so January 2023. And extended that membership to a wide range of services, education, community safety, early help, police, and the ASB teams as well. And we get a number of referrals in from schools and children's social care also in our prevention referrals that come through. We've actually seen since the introduction of that panel, we've seen a large increase of prevention referrals coming through. It's probably 3 times what it was a year ago. So, but we also have to be mindful that we've also got limited resources. So it is about where we as a service come in, because actually there are those wider services as well that can support prevention. And I think the key is having that discussion on the ground as to who's best placed to work with that child at that particular point. And so I think the prevention panel is actually really productive in terms of assisting us to really have those discussions now on the ground and understand those children coming through the authorities' doors in respect of offending and harm-related behaviour.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Spilly, you content with that?
Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now going to move to a section on governance and leadership, which was highlighted as needing improvement, including the attendance of the board. We're going to go to Councillor Della Hughes now, who has a question on membership of the board.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, is there anybody under 25 as a member of the board, given that it is a youth justice board? Do we have any young people under 25 as a part of that?
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. And just as a rider to that, perhaps you can just tackle the issue about attendance at the board, whether the membership of the board has been reviewed since the latest inspection, and whether there's a representative from CAMS on the board, and the associated issues with membership of the board. Anyway, thank you, Krista.
We have seen improvement in terms of membership of the board, and now we do have regular membership. You know, it's fair to say that sometimes we do have to, as in all meetings, I think sometimes a deputy can be sent. But, you know, I would say membership is much better than where it was. And we have full membership now. We've reviewed the terms and conditions, and we've also we've also looked at how often we were meeting as well, and whether all the membership, we've reviewed all the membership as to whether everybody on the board was appropriate and needed to attend at all times. And that, I think, has really, shown us some great steps forward. We had a consultation day with the management board where we consulted over the youth justice plan. So with operational staff and all the members of the board and deputies. And that was really productive, I think, in cementing the relationship between operational staff and board members. I think we've still got some steps to go, but I think we've really improved in terms of the journey there. And we've also got representation on a regular basis from the Youth Justice Board. And they attend every board to ensure that oversight from a youth justice perspective is there and will give us any feedback necessary. We've also now, we're responsible for a measurement that is coming in April as part of our performance framework in terms of monitoring the attendance of board members. So we will be able to, in future times, be able to provide further feedback on that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hughes, does that answer your part of the question? I think it does. Yes, you?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicola would like to come in. Nicola, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in on the very important point that was made there about young people's representation on the board. There isn't a young person's representative on the board, although I think it's fair to say, having been a member of the board for a number of years, we've had many conversations about that, because we are very conscious. Obviously, it is a service delivered to young people, and it's extremely important that young people do have a say in how that service is delivered. We don't think it would be a positive and helpful experience at this point for young people to be part of the actual board. As you can imagine, it's very strategic, and if we involve young people in the board, it has to be meaningful for them. We have had lots of young people come to the board and give us presentations or talk to us about the service. So it isn't that young people are excluded from the board, but we don't think regular membership would perhaps be particularly helpful to them. But we have talked about sort of having a young person's board that feeds into the board in a sort of way that would perhaps be more satisfactory for that group of young people. And I think Krista and the team are perhaps working on that kind of mechanism so that we can make sure the voice of the child is very resilient throughout the service. And as you've heard through the interventions and participation that Krista and the team do with young people, that information is fed into the board in order to make sure that that information forms part of our decision making.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for that helpful contribution. Bringing now the Cabinet Member for Education, Councillor John Paul Blunt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, it's just to really add on that, as Nick said, the voice of the child is very important. It adds those conversations we have with those young people that are in our service or could be potentially in our service, have that voice heard. They may not want to come to a board meeting, people may not want to do that, but they may want to have that extra link in. And so that's why it's very important that we have those conversations with people and with these children, because it's a very different way of talking to people. And I think the board needs to have that input. So that's why the voice of the child is extremely important. They may not be on the board, but we do listen to them. We do have that. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the last meeting. I was having my own child being born. So it was a bit difficult to get there. So we are there as the cabinet representative as well. We do listen to the young people, because that's why the voice of the child is so important, not just in youth justice either, across the entire education directorate. So hopefully that gives a little bit more to that as well. Thank you, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blundell. And we are very keen as a committee as well to involve the voice of the child in our work. Indeed, at the next meeting on the emotional health and well-being of the child, we're inviting members of the Youth Council to join us for that session. So perhaps you can incorporate them in some of your work to gain the voice of the child from some of our Youth Council members. I think that would be a helpful addition to your work. Unless there are any further questions on the board and leadership and governance, we'll just turn to page 32 and progress on the action plan. I understand you've been doing some targeted audits in different areas. You've probably mentioned this earlier in your introductory remarks, Krista, but what shortcomings, gaps and challenges remain for the service? Can you highlight a number of different examples from this particular action plan which requires particular attention?
Yeah, so through our quality assurance audit process, we've done a number of themed audits. I think I've described them in the report. So we've done some auditing on reoffending, on serious violence. We've also done some audits on, and we're planning to do further audits on victims and restorative justice, but we've also looked at assessment through to planning and contingency planning. And it's fair to say that because we've got a new staff group, that we still need to do additional training and support of staff to ensure that their assessment equates into a high quality plan with an effective plan B, then a contingency plan for those children if risk escalates. So that's an area that we're still looking at in far more detail, and it's part of our audit that we're currently carrying out in September for children who are going through the court process, but we're looking specifically at the assessment to plan and the safety plan and what that contingency plan looks like for the child. So we're doing some of that work now in further detail from the findings from the quality assurance audit. In terms of serious violence, historically, we know that our violence figures have been quite high. So even though we've seen a reduction in those figures, So we've seen sort of a 13% reduction in serious violence. However, we still want to reduce those serious violence incidents further. So from our audit, we've looked at what is our comprehensive response to children who are perpetrating violence, what are the interventions that we offer in terms of weapons awareness, in terms of other violent response interventions, but also what are we doing as a collective from a local authority perspective. So I'm part of the serious violence strategy group, and there is going to be an operational group which consists of police, community safety, antisocial behaviour teams, education. There's a range of professionals, and we will be completing the serious violence strategy self-assessment tool, and then that will give us a further plan as a collective in terms of how we respond to serious violence, and indeed violent incidents that sit underneath that from a prevention angle. So that work is ongoing, really. So that's a big priority for us. In terms of preventative services, also we've done a big audit before we introduced the prevention service and changed the development of the service in that area to allow us to respond to those prevention cases and have defensible decision making. So, and we will further develop the prevention service as we go along to try and ensure that that continues to be fit for purpose and is all inclusive of those children that it needs to, help or support.
Great, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer, Krista. I'm now going to move to first-time entrance in the justice system, and you mentioned just then reoffending. First of all, I'll mention first-time entrance, then I'm going to bring Councillor Jones in on reoffending. But first of all, on page 36, how do you accurately attribute the reduction of first-time entrance into the justice system to the measures which you've put in place? Because it's quite a small sample of people, I guess. And just being devil's advocate, how do you attribute that to the measures you put in place? Or could it just be, one of those freak incidents that is a variation in numbers and it might spike the next year? How do you actually assess the efficacy of the measures which you've put in place?
I think it's important that we continue to assess our prevention services to measure, to enable us then to measure the impact of who is then coming through the police station doors at a latter stage. Hopefully those prevention services that we put in place at that earlier point allows us to prevent them children coming through the police station doors. And I think it's fair to say it is difficult to predict because you could have children that were not, didn't have any prevention intervention that come through as a one-off. But I wouldn't like to say that all of our prevention services have attributed to that reduction, but I would hope that some of it is starting to, or will start to show reduction in that area. But it's too early to tell yet. I mean, it's very early days in terms of our prevention development, in terms of our service, and we need to measure and monitor that as we move forward.
It's lovely to see a positive trend, though, and let's hope that continues in the future and we more accurately be able to see how the measures are contributing to that positive trend in the future. Also, I just want to congratulate the service on a substantial decrease in the rates of reoffending. That's up until December 2022, of course. But I will bring in Councillor Jones now, who has a question on reoffending.
Thank you, Chair. If I could take colleagues, please, to page 54 of our report. And it specifically relates to education, training and employment. And there's a very good pie chart there, actually, which outlines participation. I think the worrying thing for me is 71% of children and young persons have a moderate or low attendance at education, training and employment opportunities. And if I may just quote from the report, these attendance patterns provide insights into the engagement levels and commitment of the children supported by Bridgend Youth Justice Service in their education, training and employment endeavours. While a portion of the children demonstrates consistent attendance and dedication, there are others who face challenges in maintaining regular attendance. Now, the percentages does suggest that 71% of children face challenges. So could we perhaps just have a brief discussion on thematic approach to the challenges? We don't want to go into any personal particular case, but are there any themes emerging in relation to those who are not participating in education, training and employment opportunities? Is there a correlation between this and reoffending? And I guess the final question for me would be, what punitive steps are there to consider for those who choose not to participate in this, what is, to some extent, a restorative justice process? So there's three strands: is thematic in relation to the challenges, is there a correlation between this and reoffending, and finally, what punitive steps are in place for staff to consider for those who wish not to participate?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Christa?
It's fair to say that in all of the years that I've worked in youth justice, that there has always been a correlation between children who are facing difficulties in education, training and employment with then their risk of offending or harm-related behaviour in the community. And in terms of the challenges that children face, you know, and I don't want to speak for every child coming through our service, because some of our children will come with a one-off offence or incident and never ever repeat that. But there are a number of sort of correlations, and that is children who have additional learning needs. A large number of our children have, you know, extensive trauma in their backgrounds or trauma incidents within their backgrounds, mental health needs, substance misuse, and a history of the toxic trio really within their family unit. So mental health, domestic violence and substance misuse in the family environment. How we respond to that, I think, is by meeting the individual needs of the child, and that includes that thorough assessment, which also looks at, you know, offending behaviours and risk of harm related behaviours, as well as their trauma needs. So that's why we've brought in the trauma recovery model, is for us to far more effectively understand the trauma needs that children are presenting with and how we respond to them. In terms of punitive measures, it's about responding, I think, to the needs of the child at that time. Now, whereas youth justice used to be far more punitive, I would have said, in terms of very much a risk management model, and, you know, where courts then placed lots of different criteria on children as part of an order which they had to comply with. Youth justice now allows children to escalate, de-escalate through, you know, a process in the same way as adults. And also it's about meeting the needs of the child and considering what the needs are of the child right now, and responding not just to some of their negative behaviours, but also the positive strengths that they have. So it's far more all-rounded, really, in terms of response to children and really keying in to children's strengths, because what we know about and what research tells us about children who offend is actually the older risk management model didn't work effectively because children quite often were not of the cognitive ability to understand cognitive interventions. So what we need to ensure is we provide interventions that meet the needs of children right where they are at this particular point. And then that will assist us to ensure that we build their strengths and reduce offending. And I think trauma recovery is starting to show some really positive results in terms of not just engagement, but actually how the child responds to the interventions offered at their level. So some of our work is really promising in terms of evaluations already completed on it. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Jones, would you like to come back?
Yeah, it is a difficult question, and I totally accept, one size doesn't fit all. But I think the proof in the pudding for me would be that 71% at the moment have moderate or low attendance. But what percentage of these actually go on to reoffend as an adult? Because if we can prevent them from becoming an adult, entering the criminal justice system as an adult, that would be a success. So it's looking at that 71%, and then in later years, looking at how many of that 71% we prevented from entering the adult criminal justice system. But I totally get the complex and challenging needs that the children have. But it's an indicator, isn't it? And it's an indicator, basically, of the challenges that this directorate or department are confronted with. Finally, perhaps, if you'd allow me, Chair, parental support, parental engagement, is that a high proportion as well when we look at the 71%?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Krista?
So parental support and engagement, sometimes where there are difficulties with the family, that then, I suppose, correlates to, where the child is in terms of the challenges they face. However, we advocate for inclusion of families in our interventions, and quite often a lot of our visits to children are done within their family homes with parents and carers as part of that planning process. And we also engage parents in other parenting supportive services where we feel there's a need from our assessment. So our children's social care departments and our early help parenting support programmes can assist quite often where there are issues with parenting support of their child.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Jones, you content? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I think my colleagues, Councillor Winstanley and Councillor Evans, had questions which naturally follow on from that regarding trauma needs and trauma screening. So perhaps I can invite Councillor Winstanley first to discuss trauma screening, and then Councillor Evans to add a supplementary on trauma needs. Councillor Winstanley. Your microphone is off, Councillor Winstanley, I think. There you are. You're off again.
Hopefully.
We can hear you now.
Thank you. So yes, it was really obvious from the research that's been done on trauma screening that all the children that have been that the youth justice system is dealing with have had some sort of trauma. There was certainly the emotional neglect and emotional difficulties that children had experienced. There seems to be a lot of that. And I just wonder, to what extent are we also looking at how children who have not yet got into trouble, but are also having trauma, what are we doing to help support them so that to prevent them from allowing that trauma to influence them and then becoming embroiled in minor crime.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Krista?
So currently, any child that comes through our service doors can receive an in-house trauma response. So we would assess what those trauma needs are and then plan as a collective really to respond to those trauma needs. So that doesn't matter where they are at in the system. The new project will develop that further over several services rather than just our own, to enable us to, I think, be able to respond even further to children with trauma needs than what we are now. And that's so we'll have 4 trauma leads and a psychologist attached to those services and supervision time for those staff to ensure that we extend that trauma model further than just youth justice, because our prevention arena, as you quite rightly pointed out, is vital in terms of trying to respond at that earliest point to those needs that the children present.
Thank you very much, Krista. Councillor Winstanley, does that answer your question?
That's great, and that's really heartening to know that you're rolling it out further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Evans, would you like to build upon that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Obviously, mine goes right the way back to even page 25, which takes you right up to page 49. I mean, it's noted that taking a child-first approach, there has been an introduction of the trauma screening tool for every child entering our service. And from February 23, 37 trauma screenings have been completed. What I would be interested to finding out is how many screenings are left to be achieved, and when will they all be achieved? And actually, how often will these screenings be reviewed, please?
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Krista?
So with every case manager now, the operational managers are focused on, and we've just brought in a new quality assurance system where we focus on looking at those screenings in a together way on every case that comes through. So why the numbers don't correlate is because we introduced the trauma screening toolkit in the cases from February. So anybody before that, because it was a new system, wouldn't have had that particular screening tool, albeit trauma there would have been questions around trauma on the initial assessment form. So this screening toolkit just goes into further depth around what trauma events have been prevalent in that child's life. The plan is for every child to have those screenings and then for those to be reviewed through the trauma recovery model if there's a requirement, because if they've had several trauma events, then they will automatically go through the in-house formulation process, and those trauma needs will be reviewed as part of that formulation.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Evans, would you like to ask a supplementary?
Yes, please. I mean, for me, it's just like, are we aware of how many screenings are left to be achieved? Because obviously with reviews then in the screening process, you know, with other processes, it's been mentioned today that they're going to be reviewed within on a 3-monthly basis. Well, that actually takes a lot of manpower to review all those processes every 3 months. So is that the plan for this screening process as well?
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Krista?
So we have a large Excel spreadsheet that managers take with every case manager to supervision, and that allows us to unpick what screenings have been done and which ones are outstanding. So we can count, and funnily enough, we were looking at it just a week or so ago. We've been counting up how many trauma screenings we still are required to do. It does take a lot of manpower, but if you consider every case manager that has a caseload, is responsible for approximately 10 screenings, then it's less onerous than thinking of a far larger figure, because every case manager will be responsible for their own trauma screening and then the review of that trauma process as part of their assessment planning process with that child. So the operational manager will just have the oversight of the case managers within under their remit, so that they monitor those case managers.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Evans, you happy with that?
Thank you, Chris. And it would be interested to understand the data going forward of how many are still left to be achieved, because obviously that will contribute to manpower hours as well. So it would give us an idea of how much work is still left to be achieved. So we would appreciate that data as scrutiny going forward, please.
Councillor Evans, I think you raise a crucial point there in that, and I'll build upon this now if I may, and that is, you know, the trauma recovery model. You've said at the very front end of the report, actually, will be evaluated using the Relationship Building Together initiative, which seems to be a pioneering initiative, to be fair. But it'd be interesting to know what exactly are the key performance indicators and the ultimate aspirations of this particular scheme. As Councillor Evans says, as scrutineers, we can only scrutinise the data and the information in front of us, so it'd be useful to have more information on that. But going beyond that, and I can just continue on the subject of key performance indicators, which, as Lindsay will know, that this is my hobby horse, KPIs and organisational key results. You know, you mentioned on page 39 to 41 our existing national KPIs and the additional KPIs which have been set in April 2023. However, they don't have any measures or targets against any of them. Is it too early to set targets, or are you able to provide any targets by which we as scrutineers can measure the service by? And then, if so, are you able to issue the committee with the figures against each KPI so that we can monitor it going forward? And as Councillor Evans rightly said, to have all the statistics in front of us so that we can see how the Youth Justice Service is performing.
So as a management board and as a management team, we're responsible for the completion of a performance framework report for the board that we examine and look at bi-monthly. Every performance measure has targets set underneath it, and the interesting bit around the new key performance indicators is that now they include all of our out-of-court disposal children, whereas previously our performance indicators only included those children on a statutory intervention. So what I mean by that is a court order or a conditional caution. So the new performance indicator system, which we will do our first return on in October 23, is far more extensive in terms of reporting, and we report anyway for our management board on a bi-monthly basis on those indicators on each and every one of them. So there's far more detail that sits underneath that the board are responsible for the monitoring of.
Thank you, Kristen. That data can be released into the public domain for us to see?
I don't see any reason why not.
Yeah, so as long as it's not subject to confidentiality rules, you can release some of the statistics to the committee so that we can measure performance against your aspirations. Yeah. Okay, lovely. And while we're on evaluation, page 49 and 66, you mentioned prevention evaluation systems. Similarly, the evaluation of diversion programs and rehabilitation programs. Can you highlight which strategies in all of those areas have been particularly successful while evaluating them? Microphone.
Sorry, I think particularly, I think prevention evaluation has been really effective in us then having the opportunity to develop the systems further. So we, from looking at that quality assurance audit, we discovered that really we needed more robust defensible decision making as to who was entering our services and why. And we were able then to come up with an effective toolkit that looked at previous histories of the child, any previous involvement, and we came up with a really good prevention assessment toolkit from that. It allows us really to provide the rationale for children entering our service, but also for when perhaps more universal services are more appropriate. And that development, and certainly the development of the prevention panel in a multi-agency way, has enabled us, I think, to really strive forward in terms of what the offer is in terms of planning for children from a multi-agency perspective, not just youth justice. So I would say that probably our prevention work has been a highlight for us from our quality assurance work that we've done.
That's great. Thank you very much, Krista. We'll now go to page 52, and I believe Councillor Joanna Llewellyn-Hopkins had a question on restorative justice diversion. Is that correct, Councillor Llewellyn-Hopkins?
It is, yes. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know, again, with regards to benchmarks, how we measure the success of the restorative justice system. Having used it several times in school myself, I don't find it very effective. So what changes have been made to it, and how are you measuring the success, please?
Thank you very much. Kevin?
Yeah, so we offer restorative justice service to all of our residential placements with care experienced children and in schools. It would be fair to say that there's not been a massive uptake over the last 12 months. It's something that we'd like to see improved. So really just looking at, the uptake's that small that we can look on a case-by-case basis and then just monitor the effectiveness of that intervention based on the work that we've done. And the restorative justice meetings that we have held have been successful, and we haven't seen an escalation in behaviour to children coming through the service.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Llewellyn-Hopkins?
Not really, no. Like I said, I've used the system several times myself. I find that it only works with quite well-behaved children. The very disengaged children, it certainly didn't seem to work with. So how are you sort of looking at that from that perspective? How are you looking at it, please?
Yeah, so from a youth justice perspective, it's got to be consent-led, a restorative justice intervention. If a child doesn't want to take part in that intervention, it's not going to work from the get-go. So it's got to be a voluntary participation in that intervention. And we find that if a child does want to take part in that intervention, it far increases the chances of it being successful.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Are you content with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. I believe, Councillor Evans, now you have a question on education hours. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. It was regarding sort of like the reference training and employment. On tables provided, there is a difference in the hours offered, started and ended. So, for example, in 2022 to 23, the hours offered were 118 hours. But the hours at start were only 680 hours. And at the end, hours offered were 1,001 hours, and the hours attended were only 896. I mean, can you please explain the difference in numbers and why it has happened? And why is the attendance lower than the hours offered? I mean, are these sort of like training programs not sort of like attractive enough to keep them wanting to attend?
Thanks, Councillor Evans. Krista?
My understanding of the table is that we measure from start to end. So we would measure the number of hours a child is offered education at the beginning of intervention compared to at the end. Okay, so they are going to be different figures from start to end. In terms of engagement of hours, it's fair to say that we were, I think, previously reporting on a standard amount of hours offered, and when we've done a bigger, more depth audit, what we've discovered is actually some of those offers were less than 25 or 16 hours. And we've corrected that data to allow us to reflect actual figures for education, training and employment of children. And so that would show then the difference. But in terms of us engaging children to improve their hours, it's one of our performance measures. So every child, if they are, because quite often they can be offered hours and are attending part-time, for example, because they have extensive complex needs, mental health difficulties, a wide range of difficulties. And so we can sometimes count some of our provision to assist in the build-up of those hours as a stepping-stone process. And there are times where we need to do significant amounts of work to even get children to engage. And that's sometimes why timetables are also reduced for children, is because when they have complex difficulties, there needs to be a plan in place that's fit for purpose for them. So sometimes children's hours are reduced to allow them the opportunity to engage more productively in education. And it's very much dependent on the individual's child's needs.
Thank you, Krista. Councillor Evans, you content with that?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Just turning to page 55 now, and the feedback from victims. How have you taken on board that feedback, and how have you refined the victim policy accordingly?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that victim feedback is still an area that we're working on. So we send a victim an opportunity to give us feedback every time an intervention is closed. We'll look through that in detail and take any comments on board. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
That was it.
Oh, there we are.
That was it. Thank you very much for your honest answer, and we look forward to seeing how you progress that, taking on board the feedback and refining the victim policy accordingly. Okay, I think we now move to a question from Councillor Evans on CAMS. I think it was page 73. Was that correct, Councillor Evans?
Yes, it was. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. It is on page 73. The last inspection report highlighted CAMS as a significant challenge. In fact, in the February 22 inspection, emotional, mental health and wellbeing provision for care experienced and those known to the youth justice system in Bridgend was ranked as poor overall. I mean, I'm delighted to hear that CAMS representative is now been established and on the board, and obviously we hope that that remains consistent. I do note, though, however, there are different groups being implemented. For example, the SPOA provision acts as a direct link between Bridgend Youth Justice Service, health specialist, case managers, and CAMS streamlining the process. Another one, which is CAMS operational manager, which you suggested earlier on, actually, in the beginning of the meeting. And obviously the creation of a specialist CAMS shared by Bridgend and Cwmtaf Youth Justice Services, which I assume, and you know what assumed did, is the position that it's still yet to be put into place, that obviously CAMS will be responsible for. My concerns are we diluting ownership and responsibility by having so many different tiers and groups involved in this service? And secondly, who is actually responsible to take ownership and responsibility for progressing performance and delivery of this particular service?
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Krista?
So it's fair to say, Councillor, that the group of personnel that we're talking to are very much linked as one department. So I just want to make that clear. The single point of access team are answerable to the group manager that represents as part of our management board, and so will the newly appointed, when they are appointed, specialist CAMS intervention officer or consultant. So they sit all as part of the same team, and they meet together and will meet together as a collective to discuss cases, and those most complex cases with a consultant as part of the health meetings that they have. They'll also sometimes intertwine that work with FACS, the forensic team, for your very complex sort of trauma cases. So they're very much married in terms of a department. The person that we talk about as the operational lead that has been brought in also has heavy involvement with the single point of access team and is underneath and answerable to the group manager representing at the board. So that work is very much intertwined, and it's hoped that that specialist worker will just provide addition in terms of us having on the ground consultancy rather than having to go all the time to the outside team. So it will enable the single point of access team and the CAMS officers who work as part of that team to have support, really, and an extra person to support them with youth justice related issues and children. What was the next part of the question, Councillor?
Yeah. Who takes ownership and responsibility for progressing performance and delivery of that service? So who is responsible for that service and takes ownership and responsibility and ownership for the delivery and performance?
So it would be the health board that take overall responsibility for the CAMS services. However, I think as Youth Justice, we make sure that our management board have been aware of the need and necessity for development of those services within our own Youth Justice service. And that's what we've done. So we've ensured that there's health representation there on a regular basis so that we can have those discussions, have that communication and try and move provision forward and, get development there, because, that consultant actually being part of the service has been a gap. So it's really important, I think, from my perspective as the strategic service manager, that we raise that as part of our board. And actually, it's been escalated further than the board at particular points to the health board strategic personnel.
Thank you very much, Councillor Evans. You can consent to that, yeah?
That's lovely. Just for clarification then, I'm all about the team collective and fully understand that collaboration as a whole team is crucial to the performance. However, the person responsible is the health board, yes?
Yes, that's correct. Chris has confirmed that, Councillor Evans. Okay, are there any other questions on the Youth Justice Service and Operational Plan? Can't see anyone indicating. I would like to ask whether the Corporate Director for Education and Family Support or the Cabinet Member for Education would like to say any closing remarks. Councillor Blundell. Yeah,
thank you, Chair. Now, first of all, I just want to say thank you for allowing us to come today. I think I was having to think back when you decided this was coming on the agenda, because it was on the Scrutiny Committee in the previous term if we'd had Youth Justice Service in front of us, and I don't think we had. So this is a really important step that the committee is looking at this, and thank you for no doubt the recommendations that will come through and the questions that you've asked of us today. I think one thing we want to show you is that we're on a journey here that's going one way, and it's only going for the better for the young people of Bridgend County. We started off in not a very great position, granted, when I wasn't the Cabinet Member. And then we had a whole redevelopment of the team, and we've moved on now, and we are moving forward. So I hope you can see that in the work that's going on, and I hope you can all agree that it's great what's happening. And if people want to see more or learn more about what's going on in the Youth Justice Service, please get in touch, and we'll happily bring members along, because there's some great projects that the youth justice team do, and what things they build as well. At Brentarian Infants, there's a pirate ship. I remember seeing that being built. I think they even helped Lals Community Council build a fence recently as well. So there are projects out there, and that is helping these young people. So if you want to learn more or get and see what's going on, please do get in touch. We'll happily show you all. But once again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Councillor Bundle. I know we've bombarded you with questions today, but we really do appreciate your time and the positive trend which we're seeing. We're all supportive of what you're doing, and thank you very much indeed. Lindsay, would you like to come in for final remarks?
Thanks, Chair. Just to reiterate what the Cabinet Member said, really, it's been a really productive session this morning, we feel. I'd be most grateful for the really in-depth and comprehensive questions that we've had from members. It's been really positive, so members, thank you. I think it's been really helpful. Krista, we'll all reflect upon these questions and obviously the recommendations that are put forward, because we're all in the same business. We're all in the business of making our services for children and young people better. So I certainly thank you for that. I think it would be remiss of me, Chair, and I'm sure you will say this as well, is with regard to the incredible improvement this service has made over the last 2 years. We should all be, we're lucky to have people of Krista's calibre working with us in Bridgend. They've done a remarkable job as a service, and Krista's done a great job in leading the service. Now, as Councillor Bundle says, we recognise we're on a journey. We recognise there's been significant improvement, but there's still some way to go. And we all recognise that, and certainly within the plan, you can see the robust measures we put in place to achieve that. And as you mentioned earlier, hopefully backed up by some extensive KPIs that can be measured, of course. But again, thank you for this morning, Chair. Thank you, members, and thank you, Krista, and your team for a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'd echo all those comments. Thank you very much, Krista. Keep doing all of the good work that you're doing, and we'll be there to support you every step of the way, and obviously while scrutinising the service as well. So thank you very much for your time. If there aren't any other questions, and the invitees are not expected to stay for any of the other items, you may leave the meeting, or you may stay if you wish to do so, and we'll move forward to our conclusions and recommendations. Thank you all. Okay, thank you, members, for all of your in-depth questions on the report. I really do think it's important to look at this side of the Directorate, Youth Justice Services and Family Support, as well as education, which we also go into some great depth. But I'm sure you'll agree that it's important to look at this part of the Directorate as well. So we'll now go to our conclusions and recommendations. It's always a difficult task for the scrutiny team to put together all of these during the meeting, but I'll pass on to Lucy now to see what she's captured from our discussion.
Thank you, Chair. So there's been lots of discussion today, lots of questions and responses given. So with the committee's approval, I'll run through following key points that were discussed, and then if there are any recommendations or anything you'd like to add, please interrupt me as I go through. So there was lots of discussion firstly this morning on the mental health links improving and how the data is being assessed, and the new specialist post under CAMS. Relating to this, then the length of time to appoint these link workers, and there was mentioned by the officers about issues in terms of recruiting professionals. I know the Deputy Leader mentioned the joint inspection response, which could be forwarded to, or members could view. So I'll make sure that is written down as information requested and offered. There was discussion about the financial implications and the budget breakdown and financial support provided. The officers said there was a range of grants from various places, but it was agreed by officers that the breakdown could be more explicit for future reports.
Thanks, Lucy. I think, was it Councillor Jones? He's not, he's had to go to another meeting now, but I think Councillor Jones mentioned that on future occasions, when we discuss this item, we possibly invite other partner agencies to contribute their views on this. And did he mention, members correct me if my memory's not the best, did he mention that we write to the probation service on some of the issues which were raised and to capture their opinion on it? Is that your recollection as well, members?
Yeah.
I'm sure he did mention that we would write to them. And if we do discuss youth justice services again, I think we should have a range of different partners. I think Councillor Williams, you mentioned that we have hear from schools, for example, to see how they deal with youth justice services and safeguarding, and the whole range of partners, I think, should come before us when we discuss these kinds of items again, rather than just speaking to officers. However good Krista and Kevin were, obviously they're just speaking from a BCBC perspective, and they can't speak for other partner agencies. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, I totally agree. She went through an awful lot of information. I was very impressed with how much information she was able to relay to us, but I absolutely agree. I put my hand up to say that we should be inviting schools, and my question on schools wasn't answered. So we still don't know where these children are, the 45% who aren't attending schools, and I think it's important for us to be given that information. Are they just not attending because they can't be bothered? Are they not attending because they've been excluded for a short period of time or long term and they're looking for alternative schooling? Are they being homeschooled? You know, are they wandering the streets? We need to know where these children are for a safeguarding point of view, and I think I'd like to have that information from whoever has it for this committee, please.
Great, thank you for that contribution. Lucy's recorded that, and we'll ensure that that information is obtained. Councillor Evans.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd agree with everything that Councillor Amanda Williams has actually said there, but also I think there should be outside representation, because ownership, as we all heard today, there is an onus on the health board to actually follow through on certain performance. So when we discuss this topic again, then I recommend that we actually have a representative from the health board here.
Absolutely agree, and each and every partner, I think, on the board. Perhaps that can be one of the recommendations, Lucy. Back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So following on, there was lots of discussion around the voice of the child, the repeating of the questionnaires that took place, and there was discussion about the level of engagement with children and the direct workers. This was linked in with the speech and language and the SALT assessment. I think Councillor Amanda Williams, I think, asked a question then about the, we had discussion on attendance and behaviour at the schools and what schools were doing to support these individuals. And I have written a note just to say it would have been good to have the school staff here, so I'll make sure that's definitely noted. Sorry, just going back through my notes, and then yes, and I made a note then for more information on the children not attending schools and the reasons why. Following on from that, there was discussion about the police liaison officers, and it was explained that there was a youth justice police officer, and that there were extensive programmes on weapons, and an offer of preventative services.
Sorry, missed you then, Amanda. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, on that, she did say that further work was required with regards to the school liaison officers, police officers, because there had been a turnaround of staff. So I think we need to pick that up to make sure, but I'm still not convinced that there is that much engagement with schools, particularly preventative engagement. I have 3 children. and they tell me everything like that happens in school. And I've had, I think, one conversation in the last few years where they've been into school to speak to them. So I don't think it's happening as much as it should be. So I do question that. I think more could be done there, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. That'll be recorded by Lucy. Councillor Evans, please.
Yeah, mine also obviously as well is around the trauma needs of our children, and we were not given the data basically on how many screenings were left to be achieved and how often they will need to be reviewed and how they will manage the manpower in order to achieve this. So I think that we need the relative data and ask for the relevant data regarding KPIs and obviously the information regarding this, please.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about the data and KPIs. I think Krista mentioned that it was quite early days, but nevertheless, we ought to see what kind of aspirations they have for each part of the service so that we can measure them against it, because that's what we're here to do as scrutineers. So perhaps that could be recorded not only for this particular service, the trauma recovery model and the relationship building together initiative with regards to what Councillor Evans has mentioned, but every single national KPI which I mentioned and the additional KPIs which have been put in place from April 2023. Let's try and see that. They do have the data, they confirmed that, and Lindsay mentioned that anything which wasn't subject to confidentiality clauses could be released to the committee. So no doubt we'll obtain that information, we'll circulate it for members' attention, and that can form the basis of monitoring the performance of the Youth Justice Service going forward. Okay, thank you, Councillor Evans. That's a really important point. Lucy?
Thank you, Chair. So the other thing that I just picked up that the committee talked about was the members of the board, and there was a question about whether there was anyone under the age of 25 that was part of it. And there was discussion about there wasn't a young person representative on board, but young people do come to the board and talk about the service. But they did say there was could possibly incorporate some of the young, or it might have been something that you said, Chair, about incorporating the young council members to help with their work. And I think they also talked about having a young person's board that would then feed into the board itself.
Thanks, Lucy. Councillor Hughes, you mentioned this question, didn't you?
Yes, yeah, and I totally understand what they're saying, but there could be anybody under 25 on that board. It could be a 24-year-old who themselves went through that system and is now very successful, and their life is really fine, and they might have valuable things to share on their experiences and positive things, you know. Just because I just think there should be somebody under 25 on there. There might be. I don't mean a specific young person. I mean there is a person under 25 on there per se then. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. It may very well be inappropriate for someone under the age of 18 to be on the board, but nevertheless, someone may have gone through this particular process and has an insight and on how to improve the way in which the Youth Justice Service is run. So, yeah, perhaps that, if members are in agreement, we can make that recommendation that that takes place. Is everyone content? Yeah. Okay, perhaps we can incorporate that then. Lucy, back to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, I have one more point, sorry. Sorry, I do have one more point, going back to what Councillor Evans said, and I think it was an important one, that we need to ensure that there's adequate staff resourcing and human resources to deal with some of the challenges within the service area, because as Councillor Evans said, if we don't have enough staffing resource to actually conduct some of the trauma screening, then it's going to be, we're not going to be able to reach our performance targets or ensure that our young people are safeguarded. So perhaps we can establish whether the service, and perhaps we should have asked this question outright in retrospect, but perhaps we can establish whether honestly they feel that the human resources which they have are sufficient. Because I think Krista mentioned during her contribution that she felt that in some areas, For example, I think she mentioned psychologists, clinical psychologists, youth justice, trauma specialists, and sort of CAMS officers. She mentioned that due to recruitment issues, and we've obviously rehearsed recruitment issues across the whole of the organisation, but in these specific, very specialist areas, there is a recruitment issue across the whole of local government. So perhaps we can just establish, or even a stronger recommendation in ensuring that we do have an enhanced level of support of specialist, human resources to ensure that all of the trauma screening, etc., can be managed and completed to meet some of the performance targets which they're aspiring to achieve. Okay, Lucy, anything else?
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me 1 second. Make sure I've got all that down. And then lastly, Chair, we had from the Cabinet member the offer that if members of the committee wanted to see any more or learn any more, could come along to any of the projects that they have.
Thanks very much. That's a helpful suggestion from Councillor Blundell. I don't think I have anything else on my notes. I don't know whether anyone else has anything else to highlight as part of our recommendations and conclusions. We have a number of them so far. If anything comes out of watching the video again, I'm sure you'll record it, Lucy. Everyone happy? Yeah. Okay. Therefore, we move to item 6 on our agenda, which is the draft forward work programme. Now hand over to Lucy to take us through this report.
Thank you, Chair. The Council's constitution requires the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee to develop and implement a forward work programme, and also for each Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee to propose items for their forward work programme, having regard to the Council's corporate priorities and risk management framework and Directorate business plans, and for the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee to have oversight and review any cross-cutting topics to a committee or research and evaluation panel. Following the approval of the schedule of the Scrutiny Committee meeting dates of the annual meeting of Council on the 17th of May 2023, the scheduling of standing statutory reports to Corporate Scrutiny Committee upon the medium-term financial strategy, the corporate plan, performance and budget monitoring have been mapped to the appropriate meeting dates into the draft forward work programme. Forward work programmes should be manageable to maximise the effective use of the limited time and resources of scrutiny committees. It is not possible to include every topic proposed. Successful scrutiny is about looking at the right topic in the right way, and members need to be selective, while also being able to demonstrate clear arguments for including or excluding topics. Within the report, there are criteria for topic selection to assist in maximising the effective use of time of scrutiny committees. The draft forward work programme for the committee has been prepared in conjunction with the Chair using a number of different sources, and the draft forward work programme is attached as Appendix A to this report. The Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee draft forward work programmes will be reported to each meeting of COSC, with any updates from each respective Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee for coordination and oversight of the overall forward work programme. Just to note, there are two inaccuracies on the draft forward work programme. The information in the information required section from the 4th of December meeting needs to be removed, and in the items to be scheduled, the RLN should be ALN. So my apologies for those, but they will be rectified and will be shown in the next meeting. I'll hand back to the Chair now for members' questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And as you'll see, members, we've got a whole school approach to emotional health and well-being. The rationale for this, when we sat down in our planning meeting with the head of service, was that clearly young people's emotional health and well-being has been hit quite hard by the pandemic, and we thought that that would be a useful topic to discuss. And then we've got adult community learning and a youth services report on the 4th of December. However, members may wish to prioritise something else, because I'm conscious of the fact that we've discussed youth justice services today, but of course youth services will encompass other things. So it's entirely up to you what we discuss. As usual then, in the new calendar year, we have our consideration of the midterm financial strategy in the budget. And then thereafter, we've got an update on the deployment of the curriculum for Wales and an update on the Welsh in Education Strategic Plan. And obviously the new curriculum for Wales has just been deployed this academic year. So it was basically a sense check on where we're at in deploying it and how it's been going so far. And then we have a number of other items and potential items to be scheduled, which have come out from member discussions on previous dates. But this, of course, as Lucy's mentioned, is about prioritising some of the schemes, prioritising some of the themes. There are also some member briefing sessions, as you'll see on page 92 and 93, which have been suggested. But now I'll hand over to members to discuss what they would like to see, and of course be mindful of the performance indicators which are at the back of the report, which outline some of the blue, red, amber, green sections from Q3. I should say that we're obviously at the end of Q1 now in the new financial year, so some of the data here will be out of date. So just use it as a just be cautious in the way in which you interpret some of these, because obviously things may have moved on to a certain extent. But I hand over to members now for their views, and Councillor Williams has got her hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. The item Youth Services report says in the information further details on funding as well as consideration of provision of staff, kitchen equipment and space for pupils, and delays in capital schemes and universal free school meals. So that's all set to be discussed under that heading. Is that right? No, as Lucy mentioned, that narrative is incorrect and inaccurate, so that needs to be removed from there. So what I've asked Lucy to do is go back to the corporate director and ask what is going to be actually included in that report, because we obviously need a sufficiently meaty report on youth services, and I'm conscious of the fact that we've just discussed youth justice services. It may be the case that we want to discuss something else. Now, it has been recommended that it would be a better timing, essentially, to discuss kitchen facilities, catering facilities, universal free school meals next spring, because they're going to have more information about whether we're going to be able to meet the legislative requirement of rolling out universal free school meals next September to all children. And I know, Councillor Williams, you want to ensure that that encompasses comprehensive schools and catering services in general, to ensure that they're all up to scratch, as well as the provision of universal free school meals. That's fine, but my concern is if we're pushing it back to next year, there are children at the moment in a number of our schools who are not having breakfasts. There are no breakfast clubs because there's no staff for those breakfast clubs. That's been going on since COVID. So there are potentially hungry children, which I've raised numerous times. And Lindsay said, we'll look at how we can feed those children if we can't provide a breakfast club at a school. Nothing has been forthcoming on that. We've currently got children at the moment, based on last year's rollout, without September's additional free school meals, that are standing in a queue for over an hour with just opening it up to the 1 year group, waiting for food. There's kitchens that are not there at the moment to feed these children. So I think that, you know, to delay it, whilst we might have more information, we've got these problems now. I took a group of children to meet the mayor last year, Councillor Martin Jones, and he's left the meeting now, but he'd be able to tell you, we debated school meals. And every child in there was unhappy with the quality of the meals. There were hairs being found. There was cold meals, because they were trying to get through as many children as possible without rolling out to the whole school. Meals were uncooked. I've been in and sampled some of these meals as a chair of governors. I've sat down with the children, I've looked at it, and I've seen raw chips on a plate. and we had the invite for the whole committee is more than welcome to come to Coity Primary School to try the dinners, to come and see the problems that they've got in that school with following on from 1 year's rollout, because the kitchen is too small, the facilities are too small, and I think to delay it, we're not going to do what we've promised to do for the children, and I think we need to get in there as soon as possible and ensure that they are getting healthy meals, they are getting hot meals that are cooked properly, that are of the right portion sizes, because I've noticed that the nursery children are all wasting the food, whereas the older children are going hungry. So I have concerns, significant concerns about the state of our catering services in our schools at the moment. So I'd like to see that as soon as possible, please. And that's without the issues of the comprehensive schools, because we've got winter now, we're coming up to winter, and I know Bryn Teg has 2 small canteens for a significant number of children. All the children in the upper school, well, it's not upper school, low school anymore, but really from year 11 onwards, can't eat in the school canteens. They have to go out on the town because there's no capacity for them. You know, it's and it's eating into, we're talking about well-being, and that's coming on the agenda. It's eating into learning time now to feed our children, and I know Pencoed have had a similar problem as Coity with regards to the length of time it's taking just to get through the number of children from last year, and it's eating into their teaching and learning time now. Children are missing PE because that's the one you can wipe off, because they can't use the hall for PE because it's still being used to feed children. I know there are children eating in the classrooms now because there's not capacity, and I think it's an urgent point. Sorry, I'm quite passionate about it. I'll be quiet now.
Okay, I think we can certainly put that on the agenda for our December meeting. Maybe too early for the October meeting now, but perhaps we can incorporate catering services and basically school facilities which require improvement, which aren't part of the school modernisation programme. That will encompass some of the concerns which you raised, Councillor Williams. But with regards to the rollout of the Universal Primary Free School Meals programme, I have been advised by the Corporate Director it may be too early to assess whether all of the schools which require upgrades for the kitchen facilities will be ready by then. So perhaps that element of it, the universal primary free school meals, can be delayed slightly. But the general point which you make about the upgrading of school catering facilities and school facilities in general, actually, which aren't part of the school modernisation scheme, can be discussed in December. Would that be an appropriate way of looking at it?
Yeah, because the longer we leave it, children are going hungry potentially, and I think we need to look at breakfast clubs and staffing, because that's a significant issue at the moment. Trying to get lunchtime supervisors and breakfast club supervisors for an hour a day in the middle of the day or first thing in the morning, we can't do it. And if we're supposed to be providing this service that Welsh Government have said we provide, school meals, we provide a breakfast club. There are a number of schools who haven't provided a breakfast club now for several years, and I know there are children who are missing out on a breakfast now because of that. So I think we need to include it all to make sure as soon as possible these children are being fed.
Okay, so that's been captured, Councillor Williams. If members are all in agreement that comes before our December meeting, is that okay with everybody? Yeah, okay. That's good. I think we only need to discuss our forthcoming 2 meetings, is it? Yeah, I think that's all we need to discuss at the moment. But if members do have any other pressing matters which they'd like to raise, please do raise them now. We do have quite a lot of potential items on our list. Councillor Evans? You're on mute, Councillor Evans.
Sorry, am I a bit premature in asking and bringing forward the key performance indicators in this meeting yet, or?
We'll see what Councillor Hughes wants to say first. If it's on the forward work programme, she can come in, and then we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're on.
I was sorry. I was just going to ask where it says the pre-committee site visit to small, medium, large primary school. Was that in relation to the meals, or what was that regarding? Sorry.
Yeah, as Lucy said, it's inaccurate information regarding the Youth Services report. However, Councillor Williams has just mentioned that we should all go and try the meals at Coity Primary School, so perhaps that would be worthwhile visit.
That's all right. Sorry, I misunderstood then. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor. That was an error on our part.
No, you've explained. My fault. I misunderstood then. It's fine.
I just wanted to explain that was a discussion that we had about going to visit some of the schools. I know Councillor Amanda Williams had said about going to Coity. So I think that was a discussion that we could have further in the planning meetings about possibly going there or to other schools. But obviously that probably wouldn't be able to take place before a December meeting. No. So if that was something we wanted to look at, it would have to take place a bit later. But as I said, we can have a look at everything.
Yeah, okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion to actually go and taste some of the meals and visit the school. So perhaps we can look at that in more detail. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, I also suggested we go to Bryn Teg as well to get an idea of the issues that children are being faced with, because unless we see it, it's all well and good us sitting in our homes or in the chamber, even inviting people in. We can't see it for ourselves, and I was shocked when I saw it for myself. I thought my children as well were winding me up when they just said, "Oh, I'm not eating that food." But I think we do need to go, and I think we need to go before we discuss it. Now, I think December, it's 2 months away, 2 and a bit months away. I think we can easily arrange to go out and try some food. Just a phone call for me. Can we all come in on this date? Yes, we can. There we go. Because I think we need to make sure we do it justice for the children as well.
Okay, we'll try our best to find a suitable date in everyone's diaries to do that. Perhaps we can have a 3-course meal around the borough, one in the primary school, one in the comprehensive, and one elsewhere. Lucy will has recorded that, and we'll look at the available options. Councillor Griffiths, please. Technical difficulties with the mic.
Yeah. Thank you. Can it be Friday? Because it's pizza on Friday.
Oh, wonderful. Sounds like a plan. Okay, that's been recorded as well. Okay, so does anyone have anything for the forward work programme before I bring in Councillor Evans to discuss some of the KPIs? No, I don't think so. Okay, over to you, Councillor Evans, to discuss some of the key performance indicators, but be mindful of the fact that it's Q3 from last municipal year and we are just at the end of Q1, so some of the stats may have changed.
Yeah, I fully that, and I can respect that. I mean, one of the points that I did want to raise is, why is there a need for a performance indicator reference declining but within 10% of last year? For me, why are we not streamlining our performance indicators to 3 indicators? Because we're either improving, we're maintaining, or declining. I don't see the point in having the 4th performance indicator in there. So that's one point I want to raise. Another point I want to raise is around sickness. I'm really concerned around the areas of both the Directorate and schools regarding sickness, as it's on the increase, putting extra strain on resources. And I want to understand what plans are in place to manage the downward trend, because even in 2022, the cumulative figure of sickness is actually greater than what it was the year previous. And also what plans there around succession planning. I have a concern around e-learning modules as well. Why have not all staff completed these modules? I understand that we've had a lot of new starters and there's been long-term sick. However, it should be completed in induction, which I understand that is actually written in our key performance indicator. But I want to understand, what are the consequences should they not be complete? What are the consequences if they are not completed? Another one referenced sickness. I mean, when you look at the in-depth around sickness, the highest cause is stress, anxiety, depression, not work-related, with a cumulative of 19.07 as a percentage as a directorate, and schools 20.61. I mean, what's the evidence there to suggest and support this is not work-related? How do we know it's not work-related? Also, the second highest is MSD, including back and neck. And I'm concerned around, do we see any correlation between home working and an increase within technology working as a factor for this increase in sickness? I mean, are all employees working with the appropriate equipment, for example, and resources, chairs to enable them to deliver their role? Because obviously, you know, back and neck can accumulate from not sitting correctly. And the third highest cause is infections, with the directorate at 10.80 and the schools at 14.54%. I mean, is there a link to this increase due to the pressures on staffing, as when immune systems are low, individuals become more susceptible to infections? So therefore, I want to understand what procedures and plans are in place to alleviate these pressures, reference retaining and recruiting staff. Because at this moment in time, if we still have a problem with retaining and recruiting staff, that sickness level, in my eyes, is not going to get better. So that is my major concern. I want to understand where we are with sickness, and we need to be updated more frequently, not just at the end of each quarter, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that contribution, Councillor Evans. Just for your and other members' information, all chairs of the scrutiny committees and the group leaders sit on the Corporate Performance Assessment Board, which receives this information on a quarterly basis. You've raised some really detailed questions there, which I guess, as the scrutiny chair and the corporate director need to look at in more detail. So if we may, both the scrutiny team and I will review the recording of this your questions there. I will take them up at the next Corporate Performance Assessment Board meeting on your behalf, and then I will commit at the next scrutiny committee meeting to report back on all of the concerns which you've mentioned, because you know, given the fact that we've had this information today as part of our packs, they are all justifiable questions which you've raised. And we'll get answers for you on them, and I hope that's okay that I've committed to reporting back on some of your concerns.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Councillor Griffiths has got their hand up before me. Is that?
I think it's the legacy hand when she was asking for pizza on a Friday, but
all right. Incidentally,
yeah.
That's the day I went in for to trial the school meals, and the pizza is very nice.
Oh, there we go.
It was the chips was the issue.
Good recommendation. I have to put it on TripAdvisor. Right,
yeah.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. Yeah, I agree with retention. I think we need to look at, there's a problem with retaining classroom assistants and also those in the offices in our schools, because we don't pay them all year round. And I think that's a massive problem that's going to come back and bite us in the bottom unless we look into how we can resolve this, because staff are leaving. Absolutely fantastic staff are leaving because they get paid more stacking shelves in a supermarket, and these are staff who have made massive changes for children, and I think it's an absolute crime if we keep losing these staff because they get more elsewhere. So I think that is an urgently critical thing that we need as a local authority to be looking at in line with other local authorities and Welsh Government. Two other things on there. I think I might have raised this at our meeting, Alex, that we had when we looked at the quarterly reviews, and I was told that something is being done, but I'd like to have an update on the movement with regards to sickness payments. I know I've raised this with yourself, that at the moment, schools are getting charged back at the end of the financial year. Well, actually, this year, it was the end of May when they'd already closed the books in April and were stung with substantial sums that they had to pay back to BCBC in relation to staff sickness, which took a lot of schools actually into deficit when they were forecast at ending the year in a positive. Because at the moment we're paying, the staff sickness is based on the number of children in the school, not the number of staff. So you've got, like, if you look at Heronsbridge, you've got more staff there because the very nature of the one-to-one element and the lifting and everything, and they're the people who are more likely to be injured in a work situation when they're lifting children and everything. So but at the moment, it's based on the number of children you have in your school rather than the number of staff, and you might have no sickness in your school, and yet you're paying far more than other schools for staff sickness. So we were going to have an update on that. So I'd like to see if that has been progressed now, so it's a fairer system for all schools in the borough. And I'd also like, saw in the red in those that primary school places that we have got a surplus. That doesn't tell a true picture, because if you look at where I am, Coity Higher, and all the surrounding schools is clogged up. We haven't got capacity. We haven't got capacity in a lot of the schools in the area. So I think we need to look at where that capacity is, where those excessive spaces are. Are they in one certain area? Because without that, it's meaningless on a piece of paper. So I think we need some more information from that so that we can look at where the issues are. And that's what I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I think in future, perhaps, Lucy, when we're discussing key performance indicators, it would be useful to perhaps to have it while the Cabinet member and the corporate director are in the room, because obviously all members are now raising issues which I can't answer myself. I can take them up on your behalf, but of course I can't answer on behalf of the organisation or the executive. So perhaps we can record all of this information and questions which members are raising, and then I can take them up on their behalf in the Corporate Performance Assessment Board, although I know Councillor Williams, as Leader of the Opposition, is invited to that meeting as well, so she can raise her own points. But certainly on behalf of Councillor Evans and others, I will commit to reporting back at the next committee meeting on some of those questions. I'll review the video of this meeting, and no doubt Lucy and others will be able to advise me on the extensive list of questions which you put today. And we'll ensure that some of those workforce recruitment and retention issues and sickness pay issues are brought up with the corporate director. So if we can record that, Lucy, that would be helpful. Unless there's anything else then, members, we'll move to item 7, and that's urgent items. There are no urgent items of business in respect of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules. So I'd like to say thank you to you all for all of your contributions at what has been a very extensive but positive meeting discussing the Youth Justice Service, and I wish you a happy Monday afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.